Hey guys, I have a book review for y'all, but it's not an occult book review. This is the book I mentioned in my previous video about domestic violence and childhood trauma. The book is Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. So this book has been absolutely monumental in my own recovery. Pete Walker went through the same thing. That's why he makes a distinction between complex PTSD and regular PTSD. So regular PTSD is the difference between like a soldier going overseas and getting blown up a couple times, and a soldier going overseas and being captured and put into a torture camp or a POW camp. The difference is, how do I describe this? Whenever you are held against your will somewhere and psychologically tortured, a lot of those tortures that they do in those camps, those invalidations, those, constant humiliation, and, you can't trust yourself. And they're also like, it's the combination also because what's very notorious in POW camps is that they will torture you and then they'll be nice to you because now they want to get that information from you. They're tearing you down by literally physically tearing you down and then being very nice to you. Does that not sound like a fucking alcoholic, guys? Right? So it has a very similar effect on the brain. So this isn't just good for domestic violence and growing up in domestic violence, although that is what this book is bent towards, right? But there's a very stark difference between those two things. So complex PTSD or CPTSD is not recognized by the DSM. You will not find it there, and most therapists will not make that difference. Just know that if you grew up in trauma or abuse, or if you were in a domestic violence situation where you could not get away and you were held against your will, you would fall under the CPTSD category as opposed to the PTSD category. PTSD would be having a random guy attack you on the street and then you never see them again, but it's still very terrifying and it shakes up your sense of safety. Getting into car accidents, things like that, PTSD. When you are held against your will, if you are kidnapped, right, or held against your will, that's what makes it CPTSD. Okay. And as children, we are all held against our will because we're children and we can't leave and we don't have the power to protect ourselves. I feel like this is so good because as children going through this, we developed very ingrained survival mechanisms. One of those ingrained survival mechanisms is the critic. So the critic is that voice inside your head that when you drop something goes, "You dumb bitch." It's that voice inside your head when you look at yourself in the mirror and you go, "I am so fucking hideous and fat." That's the critic. A lot of people have the critic. Well, what I really liked that he talked about was the difference between the inner critic and the outer critic, because a lot of us have an inner critic that is constantly demoralizing ourselves and destroying any ounce of self-esteem we're able to build. You have to get the critic down first. But like what happened to me, once you get the inner critic down, the outer critic might become louder. Or you might be someone who just naturally has a louder outer critic, right? This is all vice versa. So the outer critic is constantly criticizing other people and telling us, "Oh, this person made this mistake, they're not safe. Oh, this person did this, they're not safe. It's not worth, investing our time in this person because blah, blah, blah." It's looking for reasons to criticize someone else so that you feel validated and pushing them away. Because that's something that survivors do very, very badly, is they push other people away, even people that want to help. One of the best exercises that he has is talking about going back in a time machine and holding your child self, right? So like, let's say your parents just went off on you on a tirade and, you remember sitting there crying alone in your bed for hours. You didn't even sleep. You just cried until the sun came up. You would, in your mind, time travel. You would walk through that door and you'd say, hey, little guy, come here. And you, hug your child self and be like, hey, yeah, no, I know they're assholes. It's not your fault. You got dealt a shitty hand and you're doing the best that you can to deal with it. And I'm here to help you. That is a very deep, oh my God, my eyes water just a little bit, because the first time I even read that, I cried. And then whenever I did it, I cried. And what I love about Pete Walker is he talks about the importance of crying and the importance of letting yourself cry and the emotional flashbacks that can happen. So I want to tell you guys about a very strong emotional flashback I had years ago. I'm walking across the UH campus. I've been at UH for over a year now, right? And I'm walking towards the library on campus. And a guy walks past me and his smell hits me. Whatever deodorant or body wash he used was the same that my abusive ex who tried to kill me used. So I immediately caught that scent and was like, oh, fuck. Here's exactly what happened. My brain smells it. I flashback. In my head, I go into fear. And I go, I have to go home. I have to wash the dishes before he gets home. Oh my God, I have to wash the dishes before he fucking gets home. And I turned around and I was passing the fountain on the way back to the stadium before I realized I have been living in Houston for 2 years and I broke up with him. What the fuck am I doing? I literally turned around to run back to my dorm, knowing it was my dorm and knowing that I lived alone with another woman and that I didn't even use dishes because I eat at the cafeterias. No, I walked all the way back and was passing the fountain. That was at least 50 feet. At least 50 feet I was walking in fear and thinking, I have to do the fucking dishes before he gets home. If the dishes aren't clean when he gets home, oh my God, oh my God. And that's when I realized I might have something wrong with me. That might be PTSD right there. And that's exactly what an emotional flashback is. Notice how I didn't get the visual. It was just the feeling. It was just the emotion. Most PTSD flashbacks are emotional flashbacks. I was in a heightened emotional state as if I was still living with that person. And I had been broken up with this person for years. For years. Didn't even own any dishes that I was going to go home to go clean. Crazy, right? So that's a more pronounced one. A more subtle one that I'm dealing with right now. So, as a child, I was not actually very fat. I remember whenever I started softball, everyone started to call me fat. Because whenever you're in an abusive family and you get put into a box and you cannot explore other boxes, right? Because I was considered the smart one, I could no longer be pretty. I could no longer be artistic because I was the smart one. And if you're smart and pretty and artistic, you're a threat. You're a fucking threat. So if I try to be athletic, I'm going to get punished for that. I'm going to be called fat. I'm going to be told I can't be athletic. If I try to be artistic, oh, you can't draw. That drawing looks shitty. I looked at my old drawings from elementary school around the time that I stopped. I was pretty fucking good for a 7-year-old kid. I was pretty fucking good. And I was looking at my sister who was bullying me. I was looking at her artwork from the same year because they're all dated. Thank God for magnet schools. Anyway, they're all dated and we're all doing the same projects even though we're in different grades. And mine was definitely looking better than hers. And it's I was a threat. I was a threat because I was smart and I was artistic. So what did she have to do? She had to bully me into not being artistic. When I started to play softball, I couldn't be smart and athletic. That's too much of a threat. That's too much of a threat. I got bullied for being fat even though I wasn't. Someone was like, oh, you used to play softball? I was like, yeah, I was so fat back then. I didn't really do much. I wasn't very good at it. No wonder I wasn't good at it. You know, I had no confidence in it. Anyway, I pulled up the picture off of Facebook, off my mom's Facebook, and I was looking, and they're like, you look like a normal kid. And I was like, I'm not fat in this picture. This image I had of myself in my head was that I was fat, and I wasn't. Fast forward to now. I'm starting to go to the gym and get right with myself. And then what do I fall back into doing? Smoking. Because that is still ingrained in my head. I'm not allowed to be athletic. I can't be smart and pretty and artistic and athletic. How fucking dare I? Right? That I ended up starting to smoke again. It was just that little push I needed to make myself not healthy enough, not athletic enough, so that I could feel safe inside the box my family put me in. And he talks about all of that in the book, and he helps you to understand all of that. The other thing that he helps you to understand is the 4 F's. So everyone's like fight or flight. There's more than that. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. When a woman is getting raped and she decides not to fight and to go with it, and it is later used against her in court, oh, well, she enjoyed it. She was fawning so that you would not hurt her worse. And it is a valid trauma response, and women who do that are not consenting. I'm a fawn type. I should fucking know. Anyway, so yeah, he talks about developmental arrest. He talks about the 4 F's, what the 4 F's might look like, psychosomatic problems you might have when you have CPTSD, digestive disorders. When you are anxious and you cannot protect yourself, you armor. Muscularly, everything. You armor. You're tense the whole time. My muscles always hurt. In fact, I just pulled another fucking muscle. Every 4 months, I pull a muscle in my neck or shoulders because those muscles are so tight already that if I do something crazy or different, like a certain workout machine that we won't mention, I got on that motherfucker and I was so tight because I was armoring that I hurt myself. I didn't even realize that I was tensing this muscle while I was working out, that I hurt myself. This also runs through your digestive tract. You can tighten your digestive tract. You can tighten your stomach, like your actual organs. And this constant tightening leads you to have things like irritable bowel syndrome, gluten intolerance, GERD, acid reflux, all those problems because you're constantly tightening. And sometimes it's not safe to look tense. Sometimes you have to tense up on the inside because it's not even safe to tense up. Because I have had abusers where if you just went and like you tensed up, they'd be like, did you just flinch? Did you just flinch at me? You know I'd never fucking hit you. Pop. Insane, right? Fucking insane, right? This is why we are so warped. And this is why I will always love Pete Walker for calling it out. Talking about it in such detail. And I mean, I've probably only covered 10% of this book because I keep talking about what has happened with me, you know. And he also talks about the hybrids. You won't just be a fawn type or a fight type. You might be a fawn fight type. You might fawn until you fucking lose your shit, right? Yeah, and he talks about all the different hybrids so that you can identify yourself and better know yourself. Codependency, self-compassion, always practicing self-compassion, getting a handle on the inner and outer critic, mindfulness, managing abandonment depression, because we will get abandonment depression once our inner critic succeeds in either, you know, making us feel like shit in breaking up with someone, or the outer critic succeeds in making us break up with someone who's probably not too imperfect, right? Then we feel alone. And then we go into the abandonment melange, as he calls it. And it's a downward spiral. And he has an entire chapter, again, on techniques to use to deal with it. He gives you all the techniques that you use to deal with it. I go to therapy at the same time that I read this book, right? And I still read and reread and go through this book. I will reread the beginning of the book just to make sure, like, I reread this book all the time, because sometimes your brain isn't necessarily ready to work on a thing, so it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Or sometimes it makes you cry, and you stop and you cry and you come back to the book, but after that good cry, you're not really soaking anything up. So you read a couple of chapters, or you read a couple pages, and you don't really remember what you read. That happens to me a lot. Sometimes we're not ready to really soak something in, but I always highlight things. Yeah, the repression of your own emotional nature. Repression of one end of the emotional continuum often leads to a repression of the whole continuum, and the person becomes emotionally deadened. When we cannot express our fear, when we cannot express our anger and our hurt, we also stop being able to express our happiness and our joy. Because especially in abusive families, happiness and joy is not safe. Just like when they say, oh, you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about, they'll turn around and be like, why the fuck does she look so happy? She's not allowed to be fucking happy, because guess what? I'm miserable and she's going to be miserable too. And it's sad because this behavior seeps into your siblings. So it's not just your parents doing this to you, it's your siblings doing this to you. It's a learned behavior. I'm the middle of 5. So it was very rough. I feel like the bigger the family is, the more it just becomes a feeding frenzy, like sharks. And your little smirk or your smile or that skip in your step, that's the chum in the fucking waters. And Pete Walker helps you feel safe enough to feel joy again, right? And he gets you to a place where you can understand by the end of this work, you will be able to understand, wow, my parents really fucked me up, but they were so fucked up themselves, I actually feel really bad for them. By the time you get through this book, you will have, and it takes a long time. I've been reading this book for years, right? It takes a long time. I haven't even read the last chapter of this book because I know I'm not ready for the very last chapter. The very last chapter is a relational approach to healing abandonment. That's where a lot of the other stuff is. And then his self-help tools is in chapter 16. And those are really fun. So I always bounce back and forth to chapter 16. Anyway, I don't want this video to be too terribly long. But yeah, by the end of it, you'll have compassion for yourself and you'll have compassion for your abusers, which I know sounds really, really wild. But I also know that my mother was horrifically abused as a child. I know that my father was beaten by his father, was bullied by his siblings. And CPTSD, you can become an abuser if you have CPTSD and you don't get a handle on it. So if you have CPTSD and you're any kind of fight type, you're even more susceptible than the rest of us to becoming abusive later on. Because what your parents are doing is they're reliving their emotional trauma as the person in power. It's like BDSM, right? Someone wants to relive a trauma, but they want to be able to say a safe word, or they want to be the dom this time, right? That's what people do with their kids. They're like, wow, my mom did this to me and I turned out fine. But really there's something else psychological going on in there. And they're like, they feel the urge to relive this event as the parent, as the one in control. And they do. And it helps them. But that is a very unhealthy way to fix your PTSD, your CPTSD. My parents are pretty cool now. They had 5 children to do this with, so they're fine now. But now we have to read these books or face the consequences of maybe doing that one day to our kids if we don't get a handle on it. Anyway, great book. Get it. It's on Amazon. Barnes & Noble did not have it, and I was like, the fuck don't you have it? And they were like, oh, it might be Vanity published. And I'm like, did that bitch just throw shade on this book? Are you kidding me? Anyway, but you can find it on Amazon. And it is published by... It's a publisher I'd never heard of before either. Where's it at? Azure Coyote Books. Azure Coyote Books, 2013. I hope that you guys like this video. It ran long, but I feel like this was a book review that needed to run long, so I'll keep it this long, and I hope that you guys sat through the whole thing. If this at all helps you, or if you have already read this book, please, we can have a conversation about it in the comment section down below. And until next time, happy dabbling and bye-bye.